I love horror movies, especially those from the 80s and 90s when I grew up. I guess that's kind of normal, right? You love the things you grew up with that kind of shaped you. I realize sometimes they're stupid or silly or problematic, but I still love them. I've been wanting to play with making a diorama lately, and I thought the best thing to do would be to mash up my love for horror movies with the diorama. So I thought I'd make some gory tribute to an 80s horror movie. I chose Chopping Mall.
They broke into the mall for the wildest all-night party of their lives.
It's dead meat.
But you're never alone in the Chopping Mall. Chopping Mall, where shopping costs you an arm and a leg.
Some of you may already be familiar with Chopping Mall. It's a 1986 flick that involves your stereotypical teens breaking in somewhere they shouldn't be, doing drugs, having sex, and getting murdered. This time, it's robots. These robots were designed as security guards for the mall. A mall, for those youngins there that don't remember, were a big deal back in the 80s. Everybody wanted to go to the mall. It had all the stores, it had arcades, it had the people. That's where the people were. So anyway, you needed security for a mall. You needed robot security. Well, lightning struck these robots and they turned evil and started killing everybody. Now, an interesting side note, or maybe not that interesting, the movie poster for this, for some reason, had like a zombie hand holding a shopping bag. I don't understand why. Sometimes you see it redone with a robot hand, but the robots didn't even have hands. I don't know, it was the 80s. So this came out in 1986, and a thing you might recognize or find interesting is that the same year, Short Circuit came out, which also involved military robots struck by lightning, but they turned good. So anyway, I decided to build this. Follow along with me as I dust off some ancient skills I haven't used in 20 plus years and 3D model a bunch of stuff. And if you want to print these files, they are available for all of my patrons. If you sign up for the Patreon page, you get all of the 3D files that I use in this. You can 3D print them on your own. Special thanks to these patrons right here. And, everybody gets the stuff and they get to see things before it goes live. So let's get started. The scene I chose to recreate is a somewhat famous scene where this poor, unfortunate woman who just can't get all of her clothes on in time runs down a hallway in her underwear and she gets her head blown up. Now, most of what happens in the scene happens off screen, so I decided I was going to just guess at her pose. I started by just bringing in a generic kind of base figure, chopping it up into pieces in Nomad Sculpt on the iPad, and then rearranging to make a pose that seemed both startled and reacting to the robot and something that you would see in an 80s horror movie. After I got the pose down, I started modeling the head where the explosion is. Ultimately, I didn't like this 3D modeled version of the head. I thought it reminded me too much of in Terminator 2 where they shoot the liquid robot and it like splits in half, which is an awesome effect, but I didn't like the way it looked here. Everything else turned out great. The sculpting, in my opinion, the sculpting of the shirt was fantastic, and the fat around the underwear, too much. I paid too much attention, of course, to her butt cheeks. Can't help it. So I decided to scrap the exploded head modeling and do it afterwards, and we'll come back to that later when I'm painting her up. We'll recreate the blood on her head. Ultimately, though, I'm happy with how she turned out. She's got a great pose. She seems like she's actually there. Like it's plausible that she could be in the movie looking like this. Now, back to that head explosion. I didn't like the way it looked, so I tried doing it a manual way. First, I put down a base layer of dark red nail polish. I like nail polish because it's glossy. Then, using a hot glue gun, I would make a blob and draw it out and let it dry, kind of sagging a little bit into the air. I did this a couple times. Sorry, I went off camera here. After I had a few good blobs together, I went back and I painted the whole thing again with nail polish, and then ultimately went over it again with the black ink to get down inside the creases and crevices and look extra gooey. Then I just glued the little skull parts to the hot glue stuff for the final result. Up next was the robot itself. The robots in this movie I thought were short, fat, ridiculous looking things, even whenever I saw it years ago. But of course it was still kind of scary. They were evil and they killed people. Now it's just hilarious. I decided I was going to model this robot in Blender. I've been looking at Blender for years. I have a history in 3D modeling and animation. I used to teach beginner 3D modeling and animation in 3D Studio Max, so I understand subdivision modeling, I understand edge loops and polygons and stuff like that. I just don't know how Blender itself works, and Blender is big and complicated, so it was time for me to learn. I dug in, and I gotta say I'm pretty happy with the results for a 3D printed model. Whenever it came to like texturing and rendering, there were some major issues I needed to work out, but I'm happy with how it turned out. However, I did notice one major flaw in my design. I put the light on the top of the head dead center like a mohawk. But later in the project, when I was assembling everything and looking at the video to compare like colors on the hallway, I noticed their light is off center and I had just been looking at it wrong the whole time. I may or may not fix that for the download. I don't know. You let me know if you think I should fix that for the download for the patrons. So once I had the bot fully printed, or fully modeled, I 3D printed both the girl and the bot to be able to look at them, make sure everything was gonna work, and keep that inspiration. Now, check this out. When I modeled this robot, I actually put channels in it, empty hollow channels, so that I could feed LEDs through it later. I was thinking ahead, and it pays off. The electronics for this project are extremely simple. Everything is just run off of 2 AAA batteries. It's a 3-volt system. The LEDs inside the robot were some old surface mount LEDs that I had. Now, if you're unfamiliar with surface mount LEDs, those are tiny, teeny tiny. As a matter of fact, these, you could probably fit several on a grain of rice. People typically have special tools to work with these, but I don't have that stuff. I had them from an old project I was gonna do with them years ago. So I just stuck them to a piece of tape and moved really fast with my soldering iron to solder them to some wire, and it worked. They fit inside the robot. I think they look fantastic. I love the way they look, and I use those there. Now for the laser blast, I have to give credit to a YouTuber. I don't remember his name right now while I'm filming, but I will link to it below. He has a lot of videos using these, and I thought they looked fabulous, so I mimicked him there. This is basically an LED filament, kind of like what you'd see in an LED light bulb, but it's just 3 volts. It works just like other LEDs. It just looks fabulous. I soldered some wires onto that, painted the wires black so they wouldn't stand out so much, and it'll come back into play later when I assemble everything in place. For the background, the hallway, I really went back and forth on whether or not I was going to build this from scratch out of things bashed together, you know, trash bashed together, because that seems really popular. But I figured, you know, I've already modeled so much of this, why not just 3D model the rest of it? I have giant 3D printers that can print this. The file for this is also available, but most of you probably won't have a 400mm wide 3D printer. But if you do, you're welcome to download it and give it a print if you're a patron. So I modeled it up, 3D printed it. That took actually a couple days because I printed it at a pretty decent resolution, and I painted that. I did go to the store and buy a couple of enamel spray paints for this. Interestingly, that blue shade you see there, which is in the video reference, I already had sitting around from an old van I was fixing up years ago. Just a bit of fortuitous luck. So, quick paint job on that, some packaging cut up to make the windows. You can spy a little beginner mistake here. I used super glue and it hazes up that plastic. Anyway, I actually love how this came together. For the carpet, I used some felt. I have the right shade of felt, so I airbrushed this felt, this gray felt with red paint to get it to the right shade of maroon like it was in the video. I added dirty areas where people walked. Then afterwards I glued the whole thing together with a few little knickknacks and tchotchkes in the windows, and I had the hallway done. Now it's time to assemble everything. I feed the wires through some holes I drilled to get the robot in place. I get the little laser light in place. Then I flip the whole thing over and I glue down all the wires and solder it all together with a switch so I can turn it on and off. And then the last thing I do is glue the woman in place and get that laser adjusted just right so it looks like it just went through her head. And here is the final result. Now I love how this turned out. It was very encouraging, especially since I haven't tried painting miniatures since I was about 15 years old, so like 30 years ago now. I adore how this turned out. I think I might do another one. Be sure to let me know down in the comments below what horror movie you would like to see a diorama of. The gorier, the better. I'm really having fun with this angle on things. Be sure to sign up for the Patreon if you want the files or if you want to support me. Signing up for the Patreon also supports my other side project where I make game controllers for people with physical disabilities, and it's free to them. And you know, even if you don't want to sign up or donate or anything like that, thank you for watching. I love making these videos. I love the feedback I get. Leave me a comment down below. Give me a thumbs up, it helps me out. And subscribe if you want to see more. I'll see you next time.